Welcome to the K2 Sales Podcast. I'm your host, Karen Kelly. Every week, I'll be sitting down with a sales executive where they'll share their stories and experiences that produce game-changing results. Let's be honest, sales can be a tough game. I'm sure at some point, we've all delivered a less than stellar demo, been ghosted by a client or two, and sometimes maybe we did more talking than listening. And that's where I can help. The stories and insights our guests share can be applied to your own business, your territory, or with your team, so you're not reinventing the wheel. Our weekly tactics and strategies help you get out of your head and start creating your own path towards game-changing results. Welcome back to the K2 Sales Podcast. I'm your host, Karen Kelly. Now, I think we're always talking about how we have to put the buyer front and center and buyer-centric and all the other terms we have for it. But when you look deep and you do call reviews and you do call coaching and you speak with the customer, I don't know how well we're actually doing. I think we still make it about us. We're still leading with our company, our product, and we're really not buyer first. And so I was delighted to speak with the new author of this amazing book, Buyer First, Carole Mahoney, and she did a wonderful job on writing the book. The link to purchase it will be in the show notes. But really just the balance of storytelling, vulnerability from her story, a lot of data and science to back it. I think that's very important to educate us. But really she shared behaviors, traits, questions that we all possess in our everyday life, that's how we sell, and she referenced Daniel Pink, to sell as human. And for some reason, when we get on a sales call or we get in a demo, we become somebody different and we become almost like an avatar, and we lose our human touch, our authenticity, our genuine desire to help, because we feel like we have to be this other person. We have to ask all these questions and we have to be this hard salesperson. And so it's just, how can you be buyer first? And she came up with this t-shirt. It's not about me. And I can't even tell you how many times I say this when I'm coaching, that it's not about us. So how can we put their interests above ours? Practice active listening, really be intentional to uncover what it is they're sharing with you, and then go deeper and understand, the emotion behind it, the motivations, the why, all this stuff. And we get so much information when we connect, and we can build trust. We can compress a sales cycle when we do put the other person first. And she also talks about the importance of collaboration. And again, oftentimes we're going back and we're putting a proposal together and we're doing all the work, but we have to engage and collaborate with the prospect. We're the expert in our field, but they're the experts in their world, and we have to come together. And also, when there's skin in the game from their end and there's a sense of ownership and they've helped design it and co-create it, it's hard for them to say no to that, because they've been part of the building process. So highly encourage you to take a listen, regardless if you're in a corporate sales team, if you're a founder of a business. She really gives you a great blueprint, from prospecting to social media to discovery, what types of questions to ask. Like, she really breaks it down for you. So regardless of the level you're at, you will definitely take something away. I know I learned. I really enjoyed reading it. And I highly encourage you to pick up a copy and let us know whatever you applied from it, what results you gained from it, because I know that there definitely will be some. So I hope you enjoy the interview as much as I did, and thanks for watching. So when you think about the environment we're in, it's a tough one out there, and sellers are still inwardly focused. And when we can get a reminder to put our buyer first, it makes for an amazing experience for a buyer. So I'm delighted to welcome Carole Mahoney to the podcast. Carole, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Karen. I am so excited to be here with you.
That's amazing. I'm excited, and thank you for the t-shirt. How often do you get a t-shirt that, as a reminder, it's not about me? So if I ever talk too much, I just need to look down and get a visual cue.
We need that reminder though, because one of the things that I write about in Buyer First is that one of the reasons that we're so prone to talking about ourselves and what we think and what we want, we all have an opinion on something. And when we talk about ourselves, it gets dopamine released in our brains, which is, like why we're addicted to screens and other things. And so talking about ourselves is highly addictive. We need the reminders in order to not do that. The reverse though is when we get our buyers to talk about themselves and what they think, we get the dopamine in their brains. And the thing that's really cool is that the place where that dopamine comes from is where we form bonds and relationships. So if we can control our ability to talk about ourselves and have our buyers talk about themselves, we're actually building trust with them.
That's amazing. So stop our dopamine production and increase theirs.
Yeah, get your dopamine hit elsewhere.
So this is the new book that's coming out, and we'll include the link in the show notes. But Buyer First, I had a chance to read it. It's amazing book, and I would say for anybody in their career, whether they're in a corporate setting or as a founder, I found that the techniques and the tactics were very actionable, very easy to apply, and we're going to talk about this. It's almost you take it from the lens of human behavior and just this is the way in which we already ask questions, that we behave, that we um in real life, that it's not this rigid, okay, now we become a salesperson. Like, no, this is, you're already doing this, so let's just do more of it with the right people.
Mhm. Yeah, exactly. And have an intention about it. And that intention being helping someone else to do what's in their best interest and make a decision to help them move forward with that. That's what selling is about, really. It's helping people make decisions and
Hmm.
managing change.
And I think that's where we kind of get lost, because a lot of people, have it as, I have to sell you something and I have a product. And you actually have a quote here: the act of selling has been focused on our product or service and what we want as sellers, not on the buyer and what they want.
I'm going to sell you on this. I'm going to persuade you. I'm going to influence you. Are all other words for I'm going to find a way to manipulate you to do what I want you to do so that I can get what I want. And we wonder why, despite the $70 billion that's being spent in sales training annually, according to Harvard Business Review, that we're still barely making 50% of our quotas as professional salespeople. And that's not even touching on the fail rate of businesses and the amount of money that average business owners actually make. That's just another whole catastrophe right there.
And part of it, would you say, Carol, is due to almost, if you think about the corporate setting, this is the way in which they're trained. They're given, it's not even, positioning or understanding the buyer's journey. It's just, here's the features and benefits, here's the specs of what this does, go.
Yeah, like a typical onboarding program, like that's another whole book in and of itself and will actually be the next book. But if you think about the typical onboarding program for a salesperson in just about any company, it starts off with, orientation, here's your email, here's how to get to the bathroom if you're not working from home. Here's your person in HR, this is your manager, and here's the deck all about our products. And they go right into teaching them about the products. They might touch upon the industry, and the buyer is kind of like the at the end of all of this training, we're going to tell you a little bit about our buyers and then we're going to get you on the phones. And then we wonder why salespeople go so quickly into product pitches. Maybe because that's what you're teaching them first and foremost, and
Mhm.
most of the time. And so this is one of those instances where companies create the problems that they're trying to solve for. They're literally shooting themselves in the foot.
Mhm. And so what would you suggest they where would you suggest they start to reverse that and be more problem centric versus product centric?
I would have them first be more buyer centric. So we talk a lot about customer experience, and there's this big focus on customer success and customer experience, but we seem to forget that before we get a customer, we have to have a buyer. And if we don't have a buying experience that builds trust, that builds collaboration, that sets us apart, that makes buyers want to engage with us, then we're setting customer success and experience up for failure. Like, talk about trying to push a melting snowball up a hill. That's exactly what we're doing when we don't create a buyer experience. And so onboarding for a salesperson in a company really needs to focus first on the buyer and their world, who they are, the challenges they have, the impact that these have on their businesses, things that they've likely tried before and why those things didn't work for them. That we can immerse our salespeople and leaders into the buyer's world and then introduce how does our product solve this particular problem in a unique and different way, so that our salespeople are focused first on the buyer and their problems, and then focused on, all right, how do we help them solve that problem? And ultimately, if we don't, to tell them we don't, and to say no to the buyer and say, you know what, this might be a better recommendation for you. This might not be the best fit for you right now, instead of trying to figure out a way that we can sell it to them.
I think that's amazing. And I know you had in your book kind of four areas or four sets of questions in that discovery phase. And you kind of went through them there, but like uncovering status quo, why fix a problem? Why is it important to fix? And build out the decision requirements. And so where based on, what you said, like where are we going wrong? And I know, big picture where we're focusing inwardly, but is it a training? Is it a let's get to the sale quicker? Like where are we going wrong in all that?
Honestly, we focus so much on the tactics, right? We focus on what we need to do, the numbers that we need to hit. And the one thing that doesn't get talked about in sales enough or at all is the mental side of this. Like we all know that sales is a numbers game. If you don't have enough people to talk to move through your funnel, you're never going to get the number of customers that you want at the end. Yes, and it's a mental game because how you think becomes how you act, becomes the results that you get. And so, this idea of putting buyers first is really a mindset shift from we all know what we should do, right? Like losing weight, for example. We all know that we need to eat vegetables, that we need to get more exercise, that we need to drink a lot of water and get plenty of sleep at night. We know this. These are the actions we absolutely can take. We're capable of it, but we don't do it because our mindsets about those behaviors and activities get in the way. And it is the exact same thing in sales because if you think of weight loss and sales, it's about a behavior change. And
Mhm.
getting better in sales as a behavior change starts with how you think about the sales interaction itself. And some of our everyday mindsets are the things that are going to get in the way of asking good discovery questions and qualification questions and knowing when to ask for the business in a way that doesn't seem pushy or slimy or sleazy. And, I do a lot of work with salespeople and coaching and training, and we examine 5 different mindsets that are going to impact them in sales. The three most common ones are ability to control our emotions, ability to manage our need for approval from others, and how we make purchase decisions will also impact how we expect other people to make purchase decisions. I call it the how you buy is how you sell kind of mindset. And those 3 mindsets will get in the way of you asking really good, thought provoking questions of your buyers and digging deeper into their problems and the impact that those have, and the gap between where they are and where they want to be, and how they make their decisions, and the need for approval when we need to challenge our buyer in the way that they're thinking about something because maybe there's things that they don't know or hadn't fully considered yet. But if we just want them to like us and not push back on anything that they're saying or thinking, we'll never ask those tough questions to get them to think deeper. And if we're the kind of person who makes, purchase decisions based on price, or we need to do a ton of research, or we need to ask everybody else their opinion and get validation before we can make a decision, then when our buyers want to do that to us in the sales process, we're totally, yeah, I would do the same thing if
Mhm.
I were you. And we accept their excuses and their delays and don't push back on that. These are all everyday things that happen in our daily lives that when we get into sales conversations get in the way. And so that's why in the book I talk a lot about not just what you need to do, but we really focus on what is it you need to think and how you need to process things. And then the hardest thing of all is how do you change your mindsets? How do you change your beliefs in the way that you think? It doesn't happen overnight. So we talk about some daily behaviors that people can start to adapt just in everyday conversations that will help them in their sales conversations. And I think this is the missing link in sales training, in sales coaching, and all of the onboarding that we're doing is that we're not digging into those mindsets and beliefs that are going to either help us or hinder us from doing the things that we know we can and should do in the moments we need to do them. Like, have you ever had that moment where you're like, you're thinking in your mind of the question that you want to ask, but you chicken out? Or you hear your buyer say something and you're immediately reacting in your mind about what you need to say next to counter it or something. Or you get off the call and you're like, oh, I ask that question? I should have asked that question. That's your mindset getting in the way of you doing what you need to do. And 93% of salespeople struggle with this.
Ye
93%.
Yeah, that's huge, and I do see that not a lot of training or coaching or companies address that, and for me, it all starts with that belief, and it's normally not a lack of skill, it's a lack of belief, and once you can address that, things start opening up, and
Yeah. And we
I
change our
the
minds
3.
every day, right? We change our minds all the time. Like you don't think the same way you did when you were a teenager or a young adult. Life and
Mhm.
experiences tend to teach us that, but we can harness that intentionally to actually transform the way that we think and what we think and how we think so that we can show up as a better salesperson for our buyers. The interesting thing that I shouldn't say I didn't expect it because the experience that I had when I went through this process myself was it didn't just change my sales conversations, it changed me. It changed how I
Mhm.
showed up in my personal relationships. I realized this when, as I was going through this process myself, and my kids said to me one day, they're like, you know what, mom? you yell a lot less than you used to, which was a little bit of a gut punch, but at the same time made me realize that to be a better salesperson, you have to be a better person. You can't separate
Mhm.
the two, at least not in my mind.
Yeah. No, and they're one and the same, and that's why what I loved about the book is the way you just drew those stories and those innate abilities and habits and behaviors that we're already doing. And so often I think people put on this persona and this voice and this caricature, and it's like, why are you trying to become someone you're not? You're moving further away from your differentiator, which is your unique self.
Yeah, yeah. Um, And, one of the things that I do it on as a passion project is I do coaching for Harvard Business School, entrepreneurs, and they have this entrepreneurial program where they've instituted a sales curriculum. And during this process, the first year that I did it with them, they had students, they read the case study about the buyer and the seller. They gave them the setup, and then each student got matched up and would do a video role play. And as I was watching these video role plays, because my job was to then coach them and give them feedback how they could improve it. It was so funny because you talked about the costume. We had students on either side, and the beginning of the video role play, they were just having some nice, easy, everyday conversations as they would as a person. And then when they stepped into their buyer and seller roles, it was like they put on costumes and masks and became a completely different person. Because we get
Mhm.
into the sales situations and it is a different dynamic. Like there's a lot of personality assessments out there that people try to use for sales. Like if you're extroverted, you're going to be a great salesperson. But the problem is that, and we all know this, you can have a social conversation, but you're fine, you're comfortable with that, you feel confident, you're having a good time. But then when you get into a sales conversation, it's a completely different dynamic because there's an
Mhm.
exchange of value that needs to happen. There's, these preconceptions that we have about money and all of that's tied up with that. A sales conversation is not the same context as a regular everyday social conversation. And so we do tend to slip into these roles of what we think a salesperson should do. When I was giving pushback to one of my Harvard students about the lack of questions that they asked during a sales call, they said, well, isn't that what a salesperson is supposed to do? Tell them the value proposition, give them the pitch, and then ask for the business. If I ask too many questions, won't they think I don't know what I'm talking about? And it was their
Mhm.
perception of what a good salesperson did that dictated how they acted in the conversation. And unfortunately, if you've read Daniel Pink's book, To Sell is Human, I mean, I think it was over 10 years ago it was written, but it's still true today. 7 out of 10 of
Mhm.
us look at sales as pushy, slimy, sleazy used car salespeople. So when we get into
Mhm.
those roles and we have to do it, that's the modus operandi that we operate from because that's what we think we should be doing. And it's not the case.
Yeah, and unfortunately, the buyer still has that perception of us as we do of this, this seller ourselves. And what I loved about the book is that in that example there, when you have the three, like even the way in which we by the impact it has on the seller experience. But there was a workbook and we had to write it down, and I think that unless we take time and intentionality to actually put pen to paper and think about, because all this is going out there and we're probably in denial going, oh, that's not us. But when you can write down what emotions you have and even how you're showing up, are you cleaning your slate before you show up? Do you need approval? Like, do you need to be liked? And I for me, I actually did it. I wrote it down. And I just thought that was so helpful. And how many sales leaders are not doing that? A, starting with what does good look like? Because people are coming in with the head trash going, I should be doing this. And it's like, no, you shouldn't. That's 20 years. That's, Glengarry, Glen Ross stuff that we, we don't need to be doing. But even just understanding when you are bringing to the table the behaviors, the patterns in which you buy, that's what you're attracting. You're shining that mirror, and it's probably holding you back, whether it's a scarcity mindset. So talk to us a little bit about the importance of writing this down. Just to that first step is, increasing awareness and then acknowledging, oh, hang on, I am doing this, so that you can do something about it.
Yeah. It's interesting, like in my work with my clients, how much a lot of them resist writing things down, whether it's their goals or their plans or their thoughts, all of these things, we have a tendency to just kind of keep them in our heads. Even very successful people do this. And so when I ask my clients and require of them to start writing these things down, a lot of the responses that I get back is, wow, this just made everything a lot more real. The other thing that writing things
Mm.
down does for us in this process is it helps to clear our minds, right? Because we have all of these things that are floating around in our minds. By writing them down, we are literally taking them out of our heads and putting them in front of us so that we can look at them in a different perspective, in a different light. The other thing that writing with pen and paper does, neurologically, there's a connection between our hands and our brains when we're writing these things down, that we start to make new connections and pathways in our brains as a result. And that writing actually can have meditative qualities to it, which actually helps us to rewire our brains, but it also helps us to regulate our emotions. Again, going back to how do we control our emotions in a sales conversation is not get excited, not talk in our head. And so, writing and meditation and doing these things, which I have you do throughout the book, is also that you can start changing the way that you're thinking about things so that when you go into these conversations, you're calm, you're cool, you're collected, and you're not scrambling in your brain. And so it's good. I mean, writing therapy is something that trauma patients use all of the time to sort of work through some of these situations. And now that's an extreme example, but it will help us in sales as well to start, becoming aware of these mindsets. But then awareness is only the first step. We actually need to then replace that mindset with one that's supportive. It's like when
Mhm.
I quit smoking in high school. I tried it several times, tried to go to turkey, like I'm just not going to do this. I'm going to stop doing this. Like I'm going to stop thinking this way. But I had to actually replace that vice with another vice, and so I started drinking
Yes.
coffee. And it works the same way with our beliefs and mindsets. It's not enough just to be aware and try to force the willpower to stop being this way. We actually need to
Mhm.
replace those beliefs with positive and supportive ones and habits so that we're supporting ourselves. We're not just struggling with our willpower to try to make it happen, which is a somewhat limited resource.
Mhm. And I think that's where coaching and even role playing and call reviews come in because I always say game tape doesn't lie, right? And when you can look at what you're doing physically, it invites you to look inward and go, but why am I doing this? And it's probably not about, I'm interpreting the framework or something wrong. There's a limiting belief, there's something holding me back, but I'm not willing to write it down because as you said, it becomes real and then I have to do something about it.
You have to deal with it. You have to face it. And we as human beings are very good at sticking our heads in the sand and distracting ourselves from the realities that we need to face. It's amazing how much we are able to do that. Amazing and
Mhm.
scary.
But think about, I know when I was in corporate sales, I would, after every call, I would reflect. I would sit in my car and I would just write. I would actually write down what I did well and, what I could have do better. And you're like, oh, I overspoke. But when you wrote it down, you kind of owned it and you're like, I know I did that versus I'm in denial. And when you own it, then you could do something about it. But I think that reflection allows you to really look inward a root cause versus a symptom and go, what's going on here? Like, is there fear? Am I intimidated? Like, what is this? And that's the only way you actually get to the bottom and start making change.
Yeah. And while we're on the subject of like reviewing our calls, one of the things that I do when I'm reviewing calls with my clients and I encourage them to do is yes, what are you saying? What are you doing? How much time are you talking? What types of words and phrases? How many questions are you asking? Again, all focused on our behaviors. What I encourage clients to do is actually focus on the behavior of your buyer. How are they responding to you? What's their body language saying? What's their tone of voice saying? Because the more you can clue in as to what's happening on the, like, we everything is recorded on Zoom now, so there's no excuse for us not to be able to do that. And so yes, review your own performance, but view it in the context and the light of how is your buyer reacting to this. Where are they checking out? Where is the look on their face not engaged? Where are they leaning back? Where are they crossing their arms? Where are they making funny faces? Where does their tone go from excited to hesitant? These are the kinds of clues that we need to pay attention to understand how our buyers are receiving and perceiving us, and then
Mm-hmm.
analyze our performance and our behaviors accordingly.
Mm-hmm. And why do you think, in your opinion, Carol, that people aren't doing that? Because again, it's going back to that seller focus and looking at us. But I think when you look at the buyer and especially their unspoken, you kind of look at what role you play in this. Like, was it my tone? Did I ask too many questions? And then we hold the mirror to us. But why do you think we're not doing that?
So in my work, one of the things that we do is, we obviously do an assessment to evaluate what someone's strengths and skills are, what their mindsets are, what are the beliefs that they have that might be getting in their way. But we also measure for things like what I call the commitment and their will to sell or desire for success. And it's looking at how motivated are you for success. So that's one element to this, is how motivated are you to reach your particular personal goals. And that motivation then needs to tie to a level of commitment or lack of excuse making and taking responsibility for our outcomes. A lot of us want to be successful. Very few of us, though, are willing to do whatever it takes ethically to get there and are willing to take what I call extreme ownership of our outcomes, taking responsibility for the things that happen. It, if you think about it, all of life are the choices that we make. And the circumstances that we have are created by the choices that we make. And the choices we make are based on our beliefs and mindsets about a particular thing. And so I think the reason why a lot of people don't do these reviews or hire a coach or write things down is that they don't want to take ownership of it. It's easier to make an excuse. It's the economy.
Mhm.
My company's pricing is horrible. There was way too much competition. I haven't had enough coaching and training from my manager. There are a million different excuses that we can make why we didn't do something or why something didn't work out. But when we actually sit down and review it and realize the only person I have to blame is myself, and the only person who can change this is myself, that's it's a little bit of a cold shower. We when we take that kind of ownership and responsibility of things, and unfortunately, a lot of people are more willing to point the finger than they are to kind of look in the mirror and say, "Okay, what can I do about this?" 99% of life, as they say, is what happens, and that other 1% is how you respond to it. And so if you have personal goals that you are committed to reaching and you're willing to do whatever it takes, there are no limitations as to what you can accomplish. But if you would rather make excuses or point fingers or I had a horrible manager, then it's going to be very difficult for you to rise above that. You're going to continue to have that kind of a circumstance because you're actually creating it.
Yeah, I know. I couldn't believe more. And the more we talk about it, it just shows you how much selling is life. It's human behavior and it's mindset. And you have a quote here. It's about more than reaching your potential. It's about going beyond what you might think is possible. And I think people, especially founders, they play it small. They play safe. And even when they're doing their forecasting or whatever, and you just think, well, what about this? And they're like, well, what if it fails? I'm like, but what if it doesn't? And we always go to that negative. So talk to us a little bit about, I guess just our belief system and how we can tear it down so that we can think big and we can have the confidence, because when you look at sales, it's a transfer of confidence and enthusiasm, and if we're starting from an empty vessel and lack of belief, that's exactly what we're projecting to our audience.
Yeah. Yeah. When I do my work with clients, one of the first things that we do is a goal setting exercise to dig into what are their personally meaningful goals. How does it tie to their values and what they feel their purpose is? And I actually in the book left it towards the end intentionally because what I've also found is that when we go through this exercise, a lot of, like you said, they think small, they want to play it safe. What if it doesn't happen? Because part of this goal setting exercise is not just thinking about your goals, but of course, writing them down and then creating an action plan aligned to that. What are the steps that I need to take to get there? What are the metrics that I need to reach to get there? And then sharing it with someone else, like taking your
Hmm.
written goals that are so personal to you and then sharing it with someone and then reporting to that someone on a regular basis. A lot of people will do the first part. Everybody thinks about their goals. Some people will do the second part and writing it down. And, as you go through the steps, there's fewer and fewer people that are doing all of these steps. But what research and data shows is that those who have set these personally meaningful goals and that they're written down and they have a plan and a tracking system and they've shared it with someone else and make regular reports to that person, they are 298% more likely to be an elite top salesperson. 298% is not a small percentage. And
Hmm.
so if you really want to stack the game for yourself, then digging into those personally meaningful goals and writing them down and taking the scary step of sharing it with someone else, it's that what if I fail kind of motivation that will keep you going even in the tougher times. I have found that when we go through this exercise again, people tend to play it a little bit small, but one of my clients, Michael Douglas, actually, he's mentioned in the book, he had come to me because he wanted to double his sales in a year. He sells 6 to 7 to 8 figure deals for an environmental remediation software company, deals with large, super huge Fortune 100 companies. And he thought doubling his sales in a year was a reasonable goal, like he could do that. In the first 3 months, he had sold more deals in those 3 months than he had in the previous 3 years. And he said to me when after, it was about 6 or 12 months later when I connected with him again, and he had blown that first number completely out of the water. And he said, if you had told me in the beginning that this was possible, I wouldn't have believed you. But it was through this, writing it down in that process, but then it was through the small, quick wins that he was celebrating, the progress that he was noting and seeing, those small milestone metrics. He started to believe that there was so much more that he could do, that so much more that was possible. And so, a lot of times, the things that beliefs that get in our way of doing that are our outlook on things. If we have a negative outlook towards life and circumstances in general, it's going to be very difficult to aspire to reach something that you've never done before. I always thought, being a pessimist was a strength because it made me realize and plan, and I was never going to be disappointed or surprised by anything bad that might happen. But what it really was doing was limiting my ability to reach for bigger things because there was always that fear in the back of my mind. So there's a lot of different mindsets that get in our way of thinking and dreaming bigger. And another thing a lot of people struggle with is the money side of things. Because I require when someone writes a personally meaningful goal that we need to tie it to something we can measure. Usually it's monetary. Like even if you're motivated just to spend more time with your kids and your family and take less, more time off from work, you need to have a certain amount of money in the bank in order to be able to still pay your bills and do that. And so even the most intrinsic things can be tied back to some type of a metric that you can track. And people get so kind of hung up on that they don't go any further than that. And our issues with money, our positive outlooks are some of the things that also get in our way of thinking about our goals and going after them, as well as the people we surround ourselves with. Like the laws of social influence talk about, those who you surround yourself with, the 5 people you spend the most time with are the ones that's the level you're going to rise to. And as we
Mhm.
start going after bigger things and bigger goals, there's going to be those people in our lives that are going to be, well, who do you think you are? And you think you're better
Mhm.
than me. And all of these things. And that, eventually we kind of either grow out of those relationships or those relationships grow with us. And sometimes we don't want that. We want things to stay the same. We just want them to be better somehow, but stay the same. It's weird.
Mhm.
But it's really working on our mental, positive outlook on things, being able to share these things with others. And again, is that need for approval also plays a hand in this because we were not going to share that with someone else because what are they going to think of me if I don't reach these particular goals? And so we play it small. We keep things isolated to ourselves, which is very easy to do in sales as well as business ownership. And so working on these things on a daily basis, practicing meditation and gratitude, spending time with family and friends, going out in nature, actually having a good self care routine will go a long way in you being able to make these behavior and mindset shifts that I talk about in the book.
Mhm. Wow, so much stuff there. I just want to pull back a little bit when you think about even the stacking, the small wins, and what that does to our confidence. And I think sometimes people are waiting for this big whale, and it's like it's the daily incremental, kind of the boring things that over time are going to produce the results. So I love that story that he was able to, and he again underestimated his potential, which I would say most people do. But one thing I see is a big one is comparisonitis and just, because I think this is an epidemic and it's not going away. And we have to control our mindset when you think about everything coming in social media and it's all filters and people are pretending and looking, perfect. And it's kind of scary for the younger generation. That's another topic. But I think when you have ownership of who you are and really you're anchored into your belief and you're unwavering that you can kind of keep that on the outside and not allow it to seep in and start eroding away at your trust and your belief system because that is the worst. I mean, that's just a downward spiral to
Mhm.
nowhereville.
Yeah. And you're in sales. You have all of these leaderboards, right, that are broadcast throughout the company where you can easily compare yourself to everybody else. And the irony of that is I understand why companies do it because they want to motivate people and some people are motivated by competitions. However,
Hmm.
for a lot of people that comparison makes them feel less than. And
Yeah.
as you're saying, gets it contributes to this negative belief system that's going to hinder them in sales. Need for approval is something that we were born with. Like when you were an infant and you did something, whether it was walking, crawling, or screaming, you did something, and the first thing you did was look to your parents to see if it met their approval. Am I doing the right thing? We were brought up this, we were born with this. And so you enter social media, LinkedIn and TikTok and all of the other things where everything is bright and shiny and wonderful. And I'm, doing all of these things. And our first thought is, well, why aren't I doing that? Why can't I do
Mhm.
that? They must have something I don't have. And spending less time on social media is, I call it the doom scrolling. Like, when you go through Instagram or Twitter or X or whatever it's called now, and you're just kind of scrolling through and you realize 30 minutes later that you were
Yeah.
supposed to do this thing, but now you just feel terrible about yourself. And so you don't do anything. It
Yeah.
happens. Again, like everyday things that are going to get in our way of being able to have good mindsets towards sales and our buyers so that we can have collaborative conversations that actually add value. And
Mhm.
we just don't realize how our everyday stuff gets in the way of that.
Mhm. And it's only gonna get worse. Um, and when you say, understanding your purpose and your why, how do you what role does that play in the buyer experience and the engagement? Just kind of coming with an understanding and a certainty that of why you're doing what you're doing.
Yeah. I look at sales as a connection between a problem and a solution, that we are the thing that bridges the gap between the two. And that is what makes the world a better place. Now, when I talk about purpose, a lot of times I'm talking about it in terms of what are your personally meaningful goals? What do you feel that your purpose is here today in life? And then how does your job or your business or your startup, how does that tie into that? And purpose is one of those, how can I phrase it? It's kind of like one of those black holes that people tend to fall into sometimes because we spend all of our lives trying to find out what our purpose is. I think Simon Sinek's book Start With Why kind of screwed us over a little bit because we're all so focused on, I've got to find my ultimate why for all of these things to click together. And it's almost as if they think they're going to find a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. But the reality is, purpose is not a fixed thing. It's something that evolves and changes with you. It's a journey, not a destination. And your purpose will change as your life changes. My purpose when I was in my 20s and 30s was raising my kids. My purpose in my 40s and soon to be into my 50s isn't just raising my kids, but it's having an impact on the world and the people that I work with, to leave the world in a place that's better than the way that I found it. And, digging into that, going through the goal setting exercises for myself, what I realized over time is that I was brought up, in the woods, in nature, and that I was instilled in me is that you leave nothing behind. You don't leave litter behind. You leave things in a better way than you found them. And that for me is my purpose. I want to leave things in a better way than I found them. And it started from when I was a little kid, camping with my parents in the woods to the work that I do today. That's ultimately what fills me with joy, with purpose, when I know things are better because I help to make them better in some way. And everybody's purpose is different. Like, for me, my purpose isn't just in the work that I do, but it's also in how I live my life. Like, leaving the world in a better place means being as ecological as I possibly can and not polluting the planet. Like, it hurts my soul when I have to get onto an airplane knowing how much pollution that is putting into the air. Like, things like that. That's what I've discovered in my
Mhm.
journey of what my purpose is and how that plays out in my life today. And so, when you're seeking purpose so that you can identify your goals, it helps you to be centered in who you are. The validation that you have isn't going to come from your buyers or your family or your friends. It's going to come from you living in alignment with what your purpose is. And so when we talk about managing our emotions or our need for approval in a sales conversation, especially the need for approval, knowing what your purpose is will help you to combat that need for approval from others, because you're in
Mhm.
tune with who you are and what your purpose is and the value that you bring. And so you don't need the approval and validation from others, and that confidence, as you said, will come through in our sales conversations.
Yeah. I love that. And I think that validation piece is when you know who you are not tied to anything the customer says because you can immediately separate that and say like that, but that's not who I am. Like, it's just it's they're independent of each other. And I think too often that's not the case. And we take it personally and we attach our self-worth to it. And I think if you could just do what what you did and understand, and I love that the purpose, it's a journey, right? And when you understand it, the storytelling, the emotions you bring to your exchange are completely different because the fact that you went camping, like that might come up in a call and they're like, "Oh my god, you went camping, I went camping." And again, our whole goal is to also differentiate ourselves because it's a very noisy world out there. So knowing that and what you can bring that's unique and different to the table, but also kind of protect yourself that if it's not going your way, that you're not looking inward and saying, what did I do? Why am I not? It's like they had a bad day. It's not a good fit. It's not, frequent enough. And you can just kind of keep it to as a, perseverance and a protecting element as well.
Yeah, and it also affects how you show up, right? Because, a lot of people I think talk about the need to build rapport and relationships and connections in sales calls, but nobody's going in and showing up as their whole self. I remember one sales call that I had where um, I was in this office and I was talking with the president of a tech company, and he had heard me on an interview when we were engaging in the sales conversation. I think I actually write about the conversation in my book, and to build rapport with him, I happened to notice in his background that it looked like he had the top of a shotgun in the corner of his office. And I was like, I asked him, I'm like, is that a buckshot shotgun or what is that in the background? And he just kind of looked at me and he's like, well, actually, because we both lived in the country and in the middle of nowhere, and so we had weapons we both had weapons in our house because you have to when you live in the country. We have bears and other things and stuff like that. And so he brings up the gun and he shows me like the scope and things like that. So I go over in the corner of my office and I bring out my shotgun. And like this has never happened before, but we're both talking about our shotguns in the beginning of the call. And it was because I was curious, I was present, I was in tune with who I was, and just you notice these little things that you can connect with people over that you can't do if you're all wrapped up in your head or worried what they're going to think about you or trying to think of what you're going to say next. You won't be able to pick up on those kinds of things that you can form instant connections around.
And that's also not taught. Just being in the moment and calling out things like that in a virtual meeting where, talking about shotguns, like when does that happen? Not in Canada anyway.
No, right? No, well, definitely not in Canada, but, like, I live in Southern Maine, and so, like, we don't even have a police department here. We are on our own. So, like, we have to protect ourselves, we have to make sure that the fires aren't gonna happen, and, like, that's kind of a unique experience, and so to be able to see that and bond with someone over that, it requires that presence of mind and being fully in the moment. And that's what emotional management and control is. It's being able to, it's not like you don't have any thoughts that are running through your head, but they don't trip you up. You can still
Yeah.
be present in the moment and actively listen to another person and be curious, which is crucial in sales to be able to connect and ask those kinds of questions.
And I think people get afraid of, what if I'm challenging them too much? And I always say, but when you're coming from a place of curiosity and genuinely trying to understand, not to manipulate them, not to corner them so they say they have the problem and then I have the solution, but I'm just so curious. Why, in your opinion, do you think that's happening, or why? And tonality plays a role here, but they are so open to sharing what it is. And then as they hear themselves talking, that's an opportunity for you to start asking questions and getting more details. But I think we shy away from it. And it's like, if you're genuinely curious, and I know that's such an overused word, but they will open up and they will share why they think it's happening or what they're doing about it, or whatever the nature of the conversation is.
Because we all love to talk about what we think.
Yeah.
And buyers, and that's the thing, like, in the book, I talk about the example of me going to my doctors. And, I had thyroid cancer, so I had to go to doctors a lot. And for like 10 years, I was going from one doctor to the next who didn't really have any answers for me, told me the same things that everybody else did. And I was just a number on a chart to them. When I went to see my new doctor, it was this conversation that I'd never had with a doctor before. Where he's like, so what's going on? What do you think the cause of it is? You know your body better than anyone else. What do you think the best solution is? Like, what doctor says that to their patients? They're the ones with all the knowledge, and they're going to prescribe and they're going to ask you these questions in a checklist. And it's exactly how salespeople act today, right? They have their checklist of questions, which they can then diagnose and prescribe, the latest version of pills or software for you, rather than having a collaborative conversation where you feel like you have a say in this conversation and a say in how the solution is going to be described to you. That adds more value to it immediately.
And when you think about our roles as, change agents, and you've invited them to comment or, have a say in the future, they're more flexible. They're more willing to go where you, even if you're going to tell them after, but you've already invited them to think about it, to consider their point of view, versus salespeople just telling them everything. And I think when you get off the call, you're like, no one engaged me. No one asked me once what I thought. You never engaged me. We're inviting our audience to just completely check out. But when we can make it two-way and really understand, like, How do you see this? Like, what would you actually want here? Because if it's completely, left and I'm right, maybe this isn't a good fit, or maybe there's an opportunity to collaborate and work together. But how do I know that if I haven't invited you to share anything?
Exactly. And the interesting thing is if you look at the research behind collaboration, actually, it was LinkedIn's Buyer First survey that they did back in 2020, I believe, where they asked buyers, what are the things that you value most in a sales conversation? And they said, active listening and help me think differently about the problem or solution. Tell me something I didn't know. And then they asked managers, like, what's the number one trait that you look for in salespeople? Active listening was listed last. It was number one for
Hmm.
buyers and last for sales managers and people that they hire. So obviously there's a disconnect that's happening there. But the other side of this is that I think a lot of people know about IKEA, the store where you put all of your own furniture together. So one of the research studies that I came across was when Harvard Business Review, a neuroscientist did a study to understand why do people place value on something that they've had, a say in putting together. And so they called it the IKEA effect because when people feel that they have some skin or input into something that's being created for them, they will place more value on it. They will pay more for it than something
Hmm.
that was put together for them by an expert. And they also will put more value on something that was put together for them by someone just like them. Because now like this, like it's this whole, it's created just for me. No one else has this exact same setup or formula. Like for hair care, for example, I subscribe to a hair care where they customize it exactly for my hair type in my environment, and I get a subscription to it every month. No one else has this exact same hair formula that I do. And that's what buyers want today. They want something that they feel is designed exactly for them, that they've had a say in creating. And in Deb Calvert's book, Stop Selling, Start Leading, they actually did a survey of over 500 B2B buyers and found that the things or the behaviors that buyers value most in salespeople is to collaborate with them and help me to see my problem or solution differently than others have before. What is it that I
Hmm.
don't know, or what am I not seeing? That's what buyers want from us. That's what we want from salespeople, but we're not doing
Hmm.
it. We're going through our checklist. We're going through our BANT or our spin or whatever sales process and methodology of the day it is that they're going through. And it doesn't line up with what buyers are actually valuing and how they make their decisions today.
It's and that gap is widening because I read that same study where the active listening is number one for buyers and is far
Number
down the list for
five.
sales leaders, and it's just like, why are you not listening? To your team and to what the voice of the customer. But that co-creation, think about, and I did this early in my career. I would have a meeting with the prospect, and then I'd go back and I would do this proposal, and it'd be all beautiful in our logo. And then, I'd lose, and I was so happy to present it, but it was my thoughts, only my one side of the equation. And so as I got more experience, I'm like, when we can co-create it, first of all, it's very hard for you to say no because this is your idea. I'm just working with you. So I'm helping you build an internal business case for us to say yes. But you also have that skin in the game. And when you're in a competitive environment and there's three players and one of them are co-creating it, like that's that's the winner right there, because the other one did what I did earlier on, and just they go back and it's like, what I think you need. And it's like, well, you're kind of right, but you didn't even uncover this part here, and this is the bigger problem. And had you asked us or engaged with us, we could have collaborated on a solution.
Yeah. So, like you had mentioned earlier, like the set of questions that I have people go through. And, what's interesting is that everybody comes to me because they want to close more business. And so they think they need to learn negotiation and closing skills in order to close more business. But we both know that it's everything that happens before that point that is going to dictate how that end is going to happen, if at all. And
Hmm.
most people they just get the surface level on discovery, like, what's the challenge that you're facing today? Okay, yeah, we can help you with that problem and this is how we
Hmm.
do it, and they go right into it. They don't ask anything about, so what leads you to believe that that's what your challenge and issue is today? What else is going on around this? What are some of the things that you've already tried to do to solve? What worked? What didn't work? Why do you think that is? What
Hmm.
obstacles do you foresee in making this change happen in your organization? Who else needs to get involved or has input that's impacted by this? They're not asking these kinds of questions. And because they're not asking these kinds of questions, it's nearly impossible to collaborate with them on what a solution for them would look like. Now, you may be selling a product that is already designed and already created, and it's not like you can customize it to them. However, every product has multiple features and benefits, and the ones that are going to be important to them is going to depend on the collaboration that you have done with them. So, the other thing that I find that is so missing from a lot of sales conversations today is being able to uncover an issue, a gap, but then the ability to tie the issues that are happening in that gap between where they are and where they want to be in the solution, it's not being actually tied to the capabilities and competencies of the solution
Mhm.
that they're selling. They don't tie it together because you said that your biggest challenge was having transparency in your pipeline, which means you don't know what's going to close and when. We've designed a CRM system that gets updated based on the internal, like all of these different factors that happen, so that you can have full transparency into these things and know what's going to close and when with higher accuracy. Like we're not tying the issue and challenge to the capability to then help them to get to their goal. It's just, well, yep, we can solve that problem and here's how we do it. Never
Mhm.
actually getting their feedback or input as you start presenting that solution. That's one of the reasons why people are like, I don't think this is going to solve my problem.
Mhm. And it's so I mean, I see that daily, and it's just when you look back and when people reach out to us and they say, we're not our close rates are down, it's like it's nothing to do with your close rate. Like just like that, you're staying on the surface. You haven't overcome status quo. Like you have to overcome status quo. But even that problem acknowledgement, I think that's a big one. Every time I get on a coaching call and I'll say, what problem are you trying to solve? And there's crickets. They don't know the problem. And I'm like, well, that's how you're commoditized. Like when you can, stay on the surface is one thing, but then if you're trying to align it back or tie it back to a priority, a KPI, with your solution, but you don't know a problem it solves. Like everything is out the door, and then it automatically ends in it's just either ghosting, not right now, but it's never that, and it's this false perception of even I think back to the mindset. I suck at selling. I can't do this, and it's like no, you can. You just need some coaching and some training and some understanding on the type of questions you need to be asking to really get to beneath the surface.
Absolutely. And the thing is that I also think that there's this misconception in sales that the reason that things don't close is because people want to just stick with the status quo, right? Like we haven't found a compelling reason enough for them to make a decision. But research that came from the Jolt effect was that I think there was 2.3 million sales conversations that they had examined. 44% of the people who intended to buy but didn't buy was because they wanted to stay with the status quo, but the
Hmm.
majority, 56% of them, didn't buy because they weren't able to decide. There were too many
Hmm.
options to choose from. There was too many internal obstacles for them to overcome. And so, yes, part of it is, are we making the status quo untenable enough? Is it compelling enough that men want to make a change? But wanting to change and wanting a goal isn't always enough if they can't decide. It goes back to that how we buy is how we sell. Most people have a hard time making decisions because they fear making the wrong one. And because
Hmm.
we feel like if we make this decision, we can't ever change it. We're stuck with it forever. And so when we have so many options to choose from, or we don't know how these options are actually going to help us to solve a problem, we get to that place of indecision. So we need to qualify not only on compelling reason to make a change, but also qualify on their ability and willingness to make the decision to change. And that's a
Hmm.
lot of times where we have to dig into our buyers' personal reasons for wanting this to happen, why we have to tie their issues and challenges and their goals to the capabilities that we have instead of inundating them with all of the options that we could do. We have to help them make the decision and order in order for them to be able to make the change. And that's part of
Hmm.
the things about putting buyers first is really digging into those questions of what are the obstacles? What's the impact? Who else needs to get involved? What does that look like? And what are some of the things that you have found in the past when trying to do this kind of thing that have gotten in your way? Like I was working with I had a sales conversation earlier this week where they needed to go to their parent company in order to get approval for the work. And so I asked them, I said, so when you've gone before in front of them, what kinds of questions are you anticipating that they're going to ask? What kind of pushback do you think that they're going to give you?
Hmm.
And the two people on the call, they're like, you have no idea how much credibility you just got by asking that question. And they're like,
Yeah.
I wish our salespeople did that. I'm like, yeah, well, then maybe we should do some training to see if they can. But nobody, like, we don't dig into that. How are they going to make the decision? What might stand in the way? How can I help you to make this decision easier for you? We just kind of think, oh well, it's a no-brainer. They've got this problem, we have the solution,
Hmm.
it's in their budget, why wouldn't they buy? Well, there's about a million reasons why. We haven't found out any of them.
And I think the overarching theme there is that they are sellers are unaware that the root cause is their inability to make a decision. It's indecisiveness and it's based on fear. And if they just knew that, the approach they would take it would be completely different. They would be trying to de-risk it because they're the type of questions they're going to ask. Even the assessment, if I'm meeting with the person, like what is their level of decision making? Even did we go back and forth on booking the call 1,000 times? When we were picking a date, like just start looking again. These are not sales. These are just human elements, human thoughts, human behaviors. It's not like, oh, in my sales role, you know what? We went for lunch and you took 20 minutes to order a drink. Like we got to talk about this. But look
I
at patterns and behaviors in life.
Yeah, I had a friend of mine once that was late to everything. And you know why he was late to everything? Because he couldn't decide which socks to wear.
Okay.
Socks. Like,
Yeah.
seriously, like, it's in our everyday lives, and I also told this story on a workshop yesterday. We live in the middle of the woods. We have no police department, we have no fire department, and our power goes out pretty regularly because we're in the woods in Maine. And so 2 years ago, my husband and I had a hookup put into the house for a generator. And I left it to my husband. He's probably gonna hear this later and curse me out. But I left it to my husband to purchase the generator. I'm like, we have the money, we have the budget. I just need you to go pick one. It's been 2 years. He still hasn't picked one, and we still lose power. Like, it's driving me insane, and I'm about to just take it over and just go and purchase it, except that he's gonna then get upset because if we don't purchase the right one, blah, 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 blah. But this is how our everyday decision-making styles get in the way of us being able to collaboratively sell with our buyers. And we're not helping our buyers by throwing more options at them, throwing more features at them, throwing more things at them. We're actually overwhelming them into the point where they're just frozen and they can't move.
Hmm. Yeah.
And that's my
And
husband's
I
problem.
think,
He's like, "There's too many types of generators out there. I don't know which one to choose. What if I choose the wrong one? What if it breaks down? What if it doesn't work when it's supposed to? What if? What if? What if?" And meanwhile, we're still losing power. Anyway.
but, I went through the same thing buying a software package. And it was just like, this is before I read the Jolt. And then I read it. I'm like, oh my God, that was me. And they were laying the FUD on me, and I'm like, "But it's not status quo. I've already said I want to change." And that's the thing. It's like we're saying we wanna change, but they're handling it they're slamming status quo again on top of it. It's like, "But it's not status quo. It's our, inability to make a decision. Nobody wants egg on their face." And it's completely different, and the approach is different. So, I think here, like, knowledge is power, and whether it's obviously reading this book is definitely knowledgeable, but even just being in tune with who you are, and being in the moment, and just this is a person across from me, like they're late before I jump into, who else should be on the call, is everything okay, like maybe they're late because someone fell down the stairs. And I just think just pausing for a moment and being even buyer being human first. I think that's getting lost. And when we can take that approach, the type of questioning, holding space for them, active listening, all that comes naturally because we remember who we actually are and what we're doing here.
Yeah. There's a story I wrote in the book about one of my clients, Ellie, who was she's from Israel, was in the military. She's a very direct, gung-ho kind of person. I absolutely love her. But when we were coaching in our first coaching conversations, she really had a hard time with that small talk and building rapport and those kinds of things. And so we were working on that and her being able to be present and tuned into the other person. And she was having this conversation with one of her contacts that she was going over to Europe to meet at a conference and have this kind of meeting. And so she goes over there, she gets there. Now they've had these kind of like great conversations all the way leading up to this. He's been open and been friendly, but something happened. And she gets in person with him in Europe and they're standing there next to each other and she's starting the meeting and he's like very quiet, kind of closed off, one word answers. He keeps looking at his phone and she's like, and she tells me this later, she's like, in my mind I normally would have just plowed through and gone through with the meeting and gone through the agenda that we had agreed to, but I realized as I was watching him that he just wasn't himself. And so she stopped what she was saying and she looked at him and she's like, is everything okay? How are you feeling? And he was like, you know what? I'm horrible. Like my flight was late. My presentation got moved up. And now my wife is texting me about some issue with my son in his school. And he's just like flustered. And she's like, well, you must be so excited to talk about chatbots with me then. And of course he started laughing. And she's like, why don't we reschedule this to maybe after your presentations when things have settled down a bit, or even when we get back into the States? And a couple of weeks later, she tells me, you know what? He told me that I won him over with my human approach because I didn't
Mm.
just push through, because I was fully present in the moment and realized that he wasn't fully present in the moment.
Mhm.
And That's again not something that happens overnight, and it's something that we need to build daily habits and practices around to be fully present in the moment. And I think this is one of the things that changes our personal relationships as well, because I can't tell you how many times my husband would get mad at me because he'd be talking to me while I have my phone in my hand and I'm like,
Mhm.
doing whatever it is. I'm obviously not listening, have no idea what it is that he's saying. I'm just yupping him to death. And he would get
Mhm.
annoyed with me because he's like, I feel disrespected and slighted, like not, nothing I say matters to you. And that's exactly how our buyers feel when we're checked out, when we're thinking
Mhm.
about what to say next, or the objection that we need to handle, or the next phase of the sale that we need to get through, or the pitch that we need to make, or the discount we don't want to give. Instead of being in the moment, checking in with someone, understanding where they're coming from, being able to take those pauses when we need to. It is seems like such a small thing that makes such a huge difference. And it will change the way you interact with people in your everyday life. And the good news is it's something you can practice a little bit every day to build that muscle up.
Mhm.
And it just makes life better in general.
Yeah, and I think having been on both sides of that, where I'm on my phone and my husband's giving me cut eye, but on the flip side, I'm asking him 8 times and he's not responding, and so I know what that feels like, and I think there's empathy when you know what it feels like to be not heard physically and emotionally, that you are going to do everything in your power to prevent that from happening in in your engagements with your buyer.
Hopefully.
That's the goal.
That is the goal for sure. Yes.
So, listen, Carol, thank you so much for sharing your insights, all your knowledge from the book, and the experiences both personally and with your clients. I think you really let us in your life, from the storytelling with your kids and the drinking game you had with the questions. And I won't give it all away because I'm going to encourage you all to purchase this book. It is a really good read. It's I love also the data behind it. A lot of because I think sales can be very fluffy, and there's a we should do this, might do this. It's like this is backed by data and science, which I love. So we'll include the link in the show notes for sure. And for those who are interested in following you, learning more about you, Carol, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
You can go to my website, which is carolemahoney.com, which will have all of my social links there, as well as, your ability to buy the book. So the link that you give there will definitely direct people there. There's definitely forms that you can fill out. I also have my corporate training and coaching website, which is unboundgrowth.com. Or just find me on LinkedIn. Tell me that you heard me on Karen's podcast. Tell me what really stuck out with you. Let's connect on LinkedIn, because I think, LinkedIn is one of the few places that I do spend my time on social media. So if you're looking for me, that's the place to find me.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much for everything you shared today. Thanks for tuning in, everybody, and we'll see you next time.